Meeting to order, everybody. And then I'll review the meeting protocol.
Okay, guys, I motion to move the meeting to order.
Second.
Thank you.
Meeting rules. Good evening, everybody. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit that website. Following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak by using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. If you have joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. We will save that timer for when we get to public comment. I think we are stuck on screen share. Give me just a moment. Why is that still there?
I don't know if it's step 2.
No, I like this new, I didn't mention it last time, but I like this new fancy
Something else.
PowerPoint templates.
Yeah.
Gosh, there we go. That should have fixed it. And we're back. All right. We're ready for item 2.
Okay, the first thing will be, we need to amend the minutes that were already submitted, right, Heather?
Correct.
So in the original minutes that were submitted, it said that basically the meeting was started by Mike because he was the previous chair and that wasn't updated. So I guess I just motion to amend the meetings to put my name instead.
There'll be a motion to approve the minutes as amended if you agree that to the amended version.
Yeah. Anybody second?
Was that the only?
They'll be only change, right?
Oh,
Those are two things.
Or,
And then the second being that there is a comment of identifying me as a CU grad student.
Oh, is that me?
To, maybe it's just something written on your page.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just.
Those three changes, my name twice and CSU student, that'll be the way.
And
fine with the minutes.
all right, then we can move on to public participation. We have Jen Riley joining us. However, I do not see their hand raised. So Jen, if you do want to participate, please indicate so by raising your hand. There we go. All right, Jen, you should be able to unmute yourself and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Yeah, it just took a second to get the unmute. I apologize. I'm Jen Riley with Code Enforcement. I was just calling in today to update you on our new trash requirement. It's not a different requirement, but it's a different punitive process that allows for civil citation over municipal summons into court, and just kind of introduce the fact that we're gently rolling that out. It's not an all or nothing kind of start. And any questions that anybody may have, they can certainly direct it towards my department and we can clarify anything for anyone. That's about it.
Yes, her question. Sorry, thank you, Jen, for calling in and clarifying that. I just had a question. Did you say that if somebody is in violation, that they would be called into court?
So our previous system is we would write a municipal summons, which would require a court date. Our new way of doing it, which just passed in March, well, it was codified in March, it passed in February, allows for civil citation where it's just a fine. And if you want to request a court hearing because you disagree with that finding of the inspector or the process, you can request that, but you're not required to it. And it's a civil penalty instead of a criminal penalty. So it's decriminalized. And this is for weeds and trash violations.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much for clarifying.
All right, thank you, Jen.
Yep.
Let me just double check, make sure nobody else is here, and that is everybody.
So if somebody. Jen, am I? I think I'm correct in saying that,
No, it's like, since it wasn't part of the agenda, was that you just wanted to update us?
yeah, on what we talked about last time about the trash requirements that have changed specifically for the Hill.
Yeah.
Yes.
You want me to pull her back up so you can ask more questions?
Okay.
Are you ready to move on to item 4A, e-bike rebate program update? We have Matt Lehrman chatting. Matt, I have your slides ready to go, but I didn't know if you wanted to tee it up with a little conversation first. Let me know when you're ready for the slides.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, and thank you everyone for having me. I am Matt Lehrman. I am the policy advisor for energy utilities for the city of Boulder, working in the Department of Climate Initiatives. Amongst many things, I spend a lot of my time thinking about the electrification of mobility. And so that is why I'm here today. One of the components of that, among many, is micromobility and thinking about e-bikes. So the city is in the process of developing an e-bike incentive, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and would certainly be happy to take your questions afterwards as well. Are there any introductory questions or anything else I need to cover first, Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. If it's okay with the board, I just wanted to add a couple other just introductory comments, not because I need to, Matt, but I just think it might be helpful in some context setting. So this idea of an e-bike voucher incentive program is something that City Council's been thinking about for about a year. It's come up at their midterm discussion. They didn't call it a retreat, but it was a check-in, and a number of council members expressed an interest in moving forward and thinking about what that would look like, largely based on what they've seen occur in Denver, thinking about, should we do the same thing? How do we want to design a program that is really focused on getting e-bikes in the hands of people that can use them most? And I think this is something Matt will go into and talking about how it's been designed. And so we were kind of fast-tracked. One of the design criteria that council really wanted to make sure we were considering is, how do we get this program launched this year? And so it's meant pulling together a cross-departmental team between transportation and climate initiatives, finding the funding to actually make it a meaningful program. That's a big part of it. And then working with a program designer and an implementer to actually manage the program on our behalf. Take kind of the web-based applications and then figure out how to give those vouchers out. And there There's a lot of program design. I think I'm really proud. We are all really proud of what we put together in a very short time frame. So tonight, this is one of 2 presentations. We'll also be presenting to TAB, the Transportation Advisory Board. Next week, I believe, Matt. Monday. And so our hope is this is wanted to just give this this item to the board to see what you think about it. We don't have a lot of opportunity to change a lot of the design to hit some of the dates where we can get bikes in the hands of people that need them most this summer. So we'll talk about the timing, but know that we've been working really hard to get this out, and this is exciting. You're the first board to see this, and look forward to hearing your comments and feedback.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think Heather, you can tee up the slides if they're ready. I don't think I can see them, but it's probably not necessary. So you can let me know when the slides are up.
So my screen doesn't get stuck again.
Summer's probably the perfect time to start. Everyone
Okay.
wants a bike.
I can see them. Great.
There you go.
So while the slides are teeing up, as Jonathan mentioned, we have been thinking about this for the better part of the year, and this is an effort to expand access to e-bikes very broadly. That's the primary intent of the program. This is a partnership between Transportation and Mobility and Climate Initiative. And really our primary goal is to better understand the demand and impact of e-bikes in Boulder, especially as we've seen e-bike incentives become more prevalent throughout Colorado. Obviously, the Denver program was very well publicized and highly effective last year. And I think you may have seen other initiatives from the state and so forth. But this is something that we wanted to focus in Boulder. And as Jonathan said, really to launch as quickly as possible. So we've really had this cross-departmental team focus on doing just that. Next slide. I think the slides are launched now.
They are.
There. Okay. The second slide then.
It's up.
I'll trust that it's frozen on my screen. So what is an e-bike? E-bike is an electric motorized bicycle that's pedal assisted. It is intended to create a more accessible way to cycle through tougher terrain, to travel further distances, maybe to carry larger items. Potential benefits are to reduce emissions, depending on the types of vehicles and modes of transportation that you're swapping out, and to increase personal savings, particularly when we replace car trips with e-bike trips. And then there's certainly health benefits of pedaling a bicycle and just in general turning car trips into more enjoyable bike rides. There are 2 main types of e-bikes that we'll be providing an incentive for: a standard or general e-bike that looks very similar to just a regular pedal bike, and an e-cargo bike. So the general bikes are good for commuting to work or school, getting around town. And a cargo bike you could use to transport kids or pets or groceries or even larger items that you may have seen people towing around town in an e-cargo bike. So we'll have separate incentives for each type of bike depending on which you prefer and which you need. Next slide, please. So the way that the program is going to work is if you are interested in an e-bike voucher, you apply online through a web portal that we are developing, I think that Jonathan alluded to, and that will enter you into a random selection for the limited number of vouchers that are available. One reason we did this, we saw pretty significant demand in Denver, and we wanted to avoid a situation in which someone pretty much had to sign on at 9 a.m. on Monday morning and click enter, and those with the fastest internet connections would get an e-bike, would get the voucher. So instead, there'll be a random selection, and if you are selected, you receive a voucher. You take the voucher for an upfront, a purchase discount on the sale price of the qualifying e-bike. There'll be a pre-approved participating Boulder bike shops. They will accept the voucher, and then they'll be reimbursed by the city for the discount after the sale. There are 4 different categories that I think you can see on the screen for the categories. There is what we call a standard income general e-bike and a standard income e-cargo bike, and then separate incentives for income qualified general e-bikes and income qualified e-cargo bikes. The amounts for each category are based on the success of the Denver e-bike incentive program. The income qualified voucher recipients will have the option to receive a starter kit voucher as well to purchase safety equipment such as helmets, child seats, bike locks, high quality bike locks at that. But the incentives will vary based on that, based on those different amounts. Next slide. So as I mentioned, to receive a voucher, City of Boulder residents will register, the complete an online application process. And then if you're randomly selected, you'll have approximately 2 weeks roughly to complete the application. That'll provide time for technical issues or questions to be answered, to determine what type of voucher you'd like to apply for, and to receive any other necessary assistance prior to the due date of the application. When the due date arrives, we'll conduct a random selection for each voucher category to identify who would be awarded the limited number of vouchers. Those who receive a voucher then finalize their application, upload their proof of Boulder residency. If you receive an income qualified voucher, there is an income qualification process and documentation that is necessary as well. Once the recipient's verified, they'll receive the voucher and be able to select from a list of approved Boulder County bike shops from which to purchase their e-bike. As I said before, this is a point of sale voucher, meaning voucher recipients will receive their discount when they purchase the e-bike, reducing the out-of-pocket costs. City staff has worked with Community Cycles and a focus group of Boulder County bike shops to ensure this process will work smoothly. The bike shops understand it already, and hopefully we'll be able to implement that in a pretty clean way. We're planning on 2 release dates for the vouchers, likely in July and September. The first release will be about 200 vouchers evenly split across the 4 categories. And the purpose of this is to gauge interest in the incentives for each category and adjust as needed for the second release. We will certainly maintain a minimum number of income qualified vouchers and work with several community partners to ensure those in our community with the most need for financial and technical support can participate in the voucher application process. Next slide, please. So here is the web address to find more information about the e-bike incentives. City staff are still working on building out the application system, and we'll be updating the website with more detailed information about the application process for public later this spring. We'll also be sure to share our public materials once available with you and ask for your help in distributing through your channels via your role as board members when the time comes. We are available to take your questions.
Yeah, just a couple additional points. One thing I wanted to make sure that you're aware of, if you happen to look ahead in your materials, you would see that you were provided some CSC agenda topics that City Council will be discussing. One of those is actually 3B, is a preliminary look ahead for a meeting on tomorrow night. I just want to make sure you realize that those are separate things. The council has been discussing e-bikes on open space in general, so it's not necessarily connected to this voucher program. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the survey that Matt mentioned. We really want to understand the behaviors around e-bike use. So Matt made the really important point about there have been a lot of assumptions about emission reductions, BMT reductions. And the assumptions then assume that you're getting out of a car and onto a bike. This program is really about accessibility. And so we want to understand what is the primary mode of transportation that the voucher applicants are actually using. Are they on a bike right now and they're going to an e-bike? Are they getting out of a car onto an e-bike? Are they regularly take a bus or walk? So we want to understand that impact. And from that, we'll have the data that will show us the overall kind of pollution reduction impacts and emission impacts. So that's really important for us. That's why we want to be able to do some of those surveys. The other thing is this is the first phase because again, the word Matt used that's really important is accessibility. So thinking about putting money into vouchers for people to get onto bikes is really important. But we also want to talk about other modes to create accessibility. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about as a team is looking at putting money towards expanding our current B-Cycle program. And can we just put that in neighborhoods and give out either income qualified or free subscriptions to B-Cycle. So now you don't have to own a bike, but you have access to a bike. So that's the next phase as we start to think about how we can support some of the bike storage storage opportunities in certain neighborhoods, because again, big issues that have come up for us is expensive bikes going to income qualified residents to make sure that they know how to maintain them. They are clear and feel comfortable and safe when taking them to bike shops. They know what to do if it gets stolen. So those are the kind of things that we want to work with our residents to understand a little bit. But at the same time, we want to watch the program and learn as we go. So I will stop there.
Those bicycles, are those electric or just?
They are,
They are?
yes.
Interesting.
I have a question. Yeah, thank you, Matt, for that presentation. That was really, really helpful. How are you deciding on kind of the income qualifying? And are there kind of scaled versions for individual versus household or number kind of per family?
It's a good question. So the way that it's set up to qualify for the income qualify voucher, it's a household and it needs to be at or below 80% of the area median income as defined by the, I guess is the Housing and Urban Development Department, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department. So probably the easiest way to look at that is you can actually Google that and you can see what the number is for Boulder County. And that will give you a sense of if your household income is at or below that number, that 80% of the area median income, then you would qualify for the income qualified voucher.
Thank you. I have a second question. Go ahead. How do you plan to get the word out about the program, the incentives? You know, I know I heard about the Denver program after it had already started. Yeah, so I guess, how do you get the word out to the community?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have a pretty comprehensive communication strategy. It will certainly rely on word of mouth, but we have, city press releases and the city website. Ideally, this will be picked up in the media. We have social media presence as well. And then there's, I don't know the exact number. I think there's the bike shops are still forming up, but there's at least 10, I think, that are like pretty well committed at this point. And so they certainly have an incentive to promote as well through their networks, through their marketing, to say, yes, we're participating in this program, come see our bike selection and so forth. Yeah, the city communications department has that kind of multi-pronged approach.
We've also contracted with Community Cycles to do a bunch of the heavy lifting on some of the outreach. They have better visibility into some of the community that we want to reach. And we also are working with our community connectors, the city's community connectors, as well as those organizations that help us reach, like Boulder Housing Partners, for example, working with our other organizations like Climate Justice Collaborative and Flows out of CU to make sure that we're really hitting. So it's not just looking at ways to reach the traditional listener, but how do we really make sure that we're reaching the people that we want to take advantage of them.
I have one more question. Is there a way to apply for the voucher without internet access? Is there like kind of a partnership with the libraries to try to provide a way to apply for a voucher?
Yeah, so we talked about the ability to do a paper application and it wasn't going to work. So I think we will be, like, for example, partnering with the library and have relationships with the community connectors to make application possible if you don't have internet access, or if you're internet access, if you're not internet literate, you'll still be able to participate.
Yes, I have a comment and then a half-baked question. So I'm hoping I can fully bake it by the time I make a comment. But I would just like to say a big thank you to council and staff for kind of adopting this learn and adapt as you grow kind of strategy. Because I think, especially when we're in a climate crisis, we really need to just start doing things and adapt to make it better as we go along. There is already precedent for a program like this in Denver, and there's already some data from there. But it is still a relatively new thing, and Matt knows e-bikes are relatively new technology in the first place. Yeah, I just like to say a big thank you for that, because I think that's a step in the right direction. The question I had was more about the survey and how, or I guess I could frame this as an open-ended question since it's half-baked, but how do you plan to optimize participation in the survey? Are there surveys going to be sent out relatively soon after people get the e-bikes, or how long after usage? And are there any incentives to do the survey? Yeah.
That's a question that I don't know that I have the answer to off the top of my head. Let me look through my notes here. Possibly Jonathan knows.
I could share just a little bit. It's a great question / comment, so it's not half-baked at all. In fact, it's really important if we want to utilize that data to make modifications to the program, we need to make sure that people are giving us accurate data.
Right.
So we started thinking about, are there actual legal ways to ask some questions as they apply for the voucher? So this is still in motion. We're understanding the legality of whether or not you can require somebody to give you that information in order to give them this voucher.
Oh, I see.
So there's a little bit there. Could we ask like 1 or 2 questions to understand mode shift? That's a big one. And then to your second question, obviously incentivizing participation is a huge one. So yes, within the budget, we built in gift cards, the ability to make sure that people are filling it out. And right now we're kind of massaging the kind of questions, there's a sweet spot in a survey. Can't do too many questions, but you got to get good data back. So we're still working on a little bit of that, but incentives, absolutely thinking about, can we make it the voucher contingent on giving us some of that upfront information?
Or you could also make it optional to answer the questions instead of like requiring them to answer it in order to get the voucher. But yeah, that's also an interesting legal question.
For the survey, are they more questions with written answers, or do they tend to be, on a scale of 1 to 10, or yes, no? Are they mix? I know that's kind of survey participation in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's in program design. A lot of times it's like, which one of these modes of transportation do you typically use? Bike, car, bus, other e-bikes. So I think we're kind of working. The great thing is that Aptum is the program facilitator that Denver used. We are also using them. So they have a lot of background. They worked the survey for Denver. They have a lot of experience in this type of programming. So working with them in community cycles to say what's relevant to us, what's the right format to ask those questions, and how do we make sure it's good, rich data.
Is this through Be Heard folder, or it will be a separate website?
No, it'll be completely separate. Yeah.
But final, or maybe not final comment, but since we were talking about the survey and data, is there any attempt at garnering data from the Bike to Work Day kind of data pool that they collect? And is there any overlap there of useful information that can be gleaned?
My guess is, yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I think any and all opportunities to kind of plug in to what's already being done, that's a really good idea.
So the survey is only open to the people who get the vouchers, or to the people who apply for a voucher?
I don't think that's yet determined. My guess is that we would probably want to get information from anybody that wants to apply, and ask probably different questions to those that actually do get the voucher, because we do want to follow up with them and say, how have your behaviors changed now that you have this bike? What are some pain points? Do you find that it's difficult to maintain? So I think we're still kind of working on that back end of gathering information from the participants, but I think it's a really good point that we should probably get intel or information for anybody that, why are you applying to get this voucher? That's a good suggestion, but I think that's what we had originally talked about, but I'm a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Sorry, I don't know if you guys already mentioned it, but how many vouchers are there?
In the first application pool, there'll be 200 vouchers evenly split between the standard, income qualified standard, cargo standard, and income qualified standard, and then we can adjust that based on interest for the second.
For like 100?
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did learn from Denver is, well, in other programs, is that you have to have a fair amount of money to make it successful. Denver put in a good chunk of money. We've seen some other communities throw out like $5,000. And that goes like that. So we actually applied a good chunk of our climate funds. So we're spending 500,000. That's the pot of money that we're using for vouchers. It had to be large enough that we can have a significant impact. Otherwise, we didn't feel like it was worth it.
Is all of the money for the vouchers coming from the climate?
Yes, no context. And then we had additional monies that we had to allocate for the program design and working with AFTN as the program administrator.
Any other question, guys? That's cool. Well, thank you, Matt, for a really good presentation. The program it's really exciting, actually. I'm actually really wanna apply. So thank you.
Thank you. Feel free to
Appreciate
reach
being
out
here.
with any more questions, Kim.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Have a good night.
We'll plan on coming back to the board once we start to have some information trickling in. We'd love to come back and share that with all of you. Maybe think about how we want to refine and grow and modify the program. So it'd be great to come back and say, here's what we found out. What does that tell us? Should we do this each and every year? Should we change the amount of money? Should we change the way we offer the vouchers? So plan on seeing this again once we get rolling.
I know, like something, should I mention, will it be possible to, the application website or somewhere like just, what kind of bikes are there, it's like a budget, like, is $400 enough to buy the bike that I will kind of want to buy, like it's, would you go to University Cycles or something on their website that will sell them there, like where will you find? Because it's like, it's so different on the first or second slide. You had the yellow bike with, the kids in the back, but there was another one that was like more like like a cargo in the front. So it's like, actually, I just thought of like if I want to buy one, would you just go to University Cycles and see what they sell or?
Yeah, so what will happen is right now we have 10 bike shops and this is Boulder County. So you can purchase from any bike shop in Boulder County. They'll be listed on the website. There'll be that contact. You can go into our portal. You can see what their inventory is.
Okay.
So you can say, I want something that is, I want the extra cycle with the bags on the side, or I want the cargo up front because I'm going to take my kids to school, or I'm just going to do my grocery shopping, or I don't care about that. I just want an e-bike. So you'll be able to see that inventory by bike shop. If you want to, if you actually want to do that kind of shopping online, or you can just, go into the shops and try them out.
Oh, yeah, so, but the partners will be listed, so I can
Yes.
do my own research and
Yes.
figure it out. I want, okay, cool.
I guess we've already stopped the agenda. Matt's still here. But I have another question if we could, hello. I just thought of another question. If we do have some kind of optional or non-optional survey based on the legality of asking questions at the application phase, could we somehow? Yeah, I don't see why there would be any legal restrictions to doing this, but could we somehow prioritize those people who say that they would be moving from like a gasoline vehicle to an e-bike, if we're already going to be asking those questions?
I think that's tricky. I see what you're getting and I like the thought behind it. The two ways that you can offer these vouchers is on a first come, first serve, and we didn't like that because it then suggests that you get online and I happen to be at a computer when this is released, and we learned this from Denver,
Some
like it
Denver,
sells
yeah.
out in
Yeah.
6 minutes.
Exactly.
Like that is not a fair way to reach the people that we want to reach. So that's why. Yeah, and then you have to go around. So this idea of a sweepstakes, they call it sweepstakes rather, I call it a lottery. Like when you go in a river permit, you put your name in and you wait to see if you get drawn. So there is a particular legal structure to that sweepstakes technology that doesn't give anybody kind of a you're not selecting one group over another group. It's like randomized across everybody that applies. So I guess it's worth talking to Aptum about. They know this, they work at this. Number one, how would you do it? How do you make sure that people aren't gaming in any way? I don't know.
Right,
It's something to
and
think
that
about.
was the obvious question that I had in my head, how would you know that people are not then lying on the survey just to get the e-bike? Because they would say that they're gonna transition away from car, but or maybe there could be, like, we could somehow, well, yeah. 400 is divisible by 5. If we had like a fifth option for people who are specifically going to switch from a gasoline powered vehicle to an e-bike.
Mhm.
Or even like from a motorcycle.
I like this idea as we think about the phase 2,
Mhm.
because I think we can gather a lot of information from this first phase and help, like, wow, we hardly got anybody that was
Right.
kind of shifting from car to bike. So maybe we need to think about a different structure to the incentive to get the behavior that.
Yeah, I think that was my concern, being at, like very quickly skimming. I wouldn't say that I know a lot about what's going on the Denver e-bike program statistics, but I think there were some preliminary statistics saying that most people were transitioning from a regular bike to an e-bike.
Yeah.
Which was actually increasing electric load.
It happened in our house, I'll be totally honest with you.
Yeah.
Good comments.
Thank you, Matt, again.
Feel free.
If you want, or you can stay.
I have a 2-year-old and a 9-month-old that need to tend to.
Oh,
Staring.
Oh, wait.
okay, well, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's just move on to the next item. The presentation on consumption-based accounting. That's interesting.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Katz-Moses. I have some slides here that I would like to share.
And you want to introduce yourself? Are you going to do that in your slides?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. And just let me get them up. However, I can introduce myself now. I'm Ben Katz-Moses. I'm the Sustainability Data Analyst for the Climate Initiatives Department. I'm here today to talk about a consumption-based emissions inventory or consumption-based accounting. So.
While he's doing that, if the board would indulge, I can't do, I'm going to do this. Sorry, I'm going to annoy you. I just really want to appreciate Ben. He's, I don't remember how long now. Are you at your year and it doesn't matter.
Coming up.
I'm day 366.
Oh, congratulations. Yesterday.
Well, my point is that Ben is relatively new to the department and it's really fantastic. So he's brought a really interesting kind of thought leadership to how we think about calculating not just our emissions, and he's leading a bunch of work in our department around our impact. So impact is different than just metric tons of carbon. Impact has a lot of qualitative and quantitative benefits in terms of the work that we do. And so he is really bringing a lot of thought in terms of how do we actually capture the impact. And part of what we've talked about, and I think, I don't recall if any of you have been on the board long enough, but there was some discussion, gosh, well over a year ago, maybe a couple of years now, to talk about this shift to consumption-based inventories to fully capture what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and And that was a real challenge, I think, to have that conversation with city council, because the initial thought is, wow, our inventory actually numbers go up. But it's a more honest way of accounting for the goods and services that we're consuming in our community. Things come in, where they go. So Ben has just been really a true champion and a great thought leader in this. And he sits on a lot of different committees and panels nationwide that are really starting to think about the cutting edge work around consumption-based inventories. All right, there you go. I bought you some time.
All right, thanks. And are my slides up?
Yes, they are.
Okay, great. So yeah, like I said, I'm our sustainability data analyst on the climate initiatives team. And a big part of my work is to work with the consultants who put together our greenhouse gas inventories. And so this talk's going to be a little bit of overview of our community greenhouse gas inventory, which we've been doing for a while. And then this new consumption-based emissions inventory, which is going to be released hopefully sometime this spring or early summer. So I'll give a little bit of an overview of our current inventory that covers our community, talk about what embodied emissions are and some history about our work to date in understanding those, and then get into what a consumption-based inventory is and actually share some preliminary results. So feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point, but I'll just keep going and give a high-level overview of what these things are, so we're kind of all on the same page. So the type of inventory we've done historically is, some people call it a geographic inventory or a sector-based greenhouse gas inventory. And these are inventories that measure emissions produced by their economic sector. And they also include emissions that are associated with the electricity consumption that is generated outside the boundary, but consumed inside the boundary. And I probably won't refer to emissions much in terms of their scopes, but it's helpful to think about them in these different categories. So scope 1 emissions and scope 2 emissions are those that are covered in a sector-based inventory. And those are, scope 1 emissions are released into the atmosphere as a direct result of activities inside the boundary. So like driving an internal combustion engine around. Scope 2 are released into the atmosphere, often outside the boundary as electricity is generated. So if you drive an electric vehicle around town, the emissions associated with the driving really was produced outside. Both of those types are included in our current inventory. And when we start to talk about consumption, we're typically covering scope 3 emissions, which really get into the upstream and downstream emissions of buildings, products, goods, services. But these can occur anywhere in the world. So our existing inventory, our community inventory, follows a global protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emissions. This is really a robust framework that everyone follows, and it allows you to calculate, tells you how to calculate and report citywide greenhouse gas emissions. We've been doing this for a long time. The first greenhouse gas inventory community-wide that we did was in 2005, and it became an annual process in 2015, which is also the year we started following the global protocol. As time goes on, the methodology changes and improves, and data sources improve. And so we're actually including more sources now today than we were historically. So each year it increases in that sense. And in 2021, which is our most recent inventory, here's just a little snapshot of what things look like at a very high level. But stationary energy plays a big role. That's electricity and natural gas. And transportation is sort of the other big component here. And most of that's on road, but we also track aviation fuels as residents of Boulder fly for their own personal reasons. Over time, emissions have trended downwards. They've dropped 15% since 2018 and 32% since 2005. Although the grid has gotten substantially cleaner over that time, it still remains the largest source of emissions. And I think what's an interesting point to make here is that waste is also, or waste management is really something we do track in this inventory. It makes up only 2% of total emissions, which is really an interesting thing because it tracks waste management, but it doesn't talk about those scope 3 emissions I mentioned earlier. And sometimes these are referred to as embodied emissions. So what were all the emissions of the things that wind up in our waste stream? And so I'm going to shift now to kind of talking about the meat of the presentation, which is understanding and tracking embodied emissions, which are in the things that we consume. And so embodied emissions are emissions that are associated with materials and construction processes throughout the entire life cycle of buildings, goods, and services. So imagine starting to track emissions as soon as raw materials are extracted all the way until they wind up in the landfill or recycled. There are a lot along the way, and typically sector-based inventories don't track a lot of this. And I think one of the questions is how much do they matter? So this is a breakdown of household emissions, looking at their supply chain. And so typically when we think of emissions, we might think of cars, tailpipes, things emitting from tailpipes. But it turns out there's a lot of emissions associated with the production, the transportation, and the sale of those items as well. Even a quarter of emissions of vehicles or transportation occur in those phases, not in the actual usage. And that's even more glaring when you look at something like food, where almost the entire amount of emissions are embodied before we ever consume the food itself or before it ever arrives to us. So they really do matter a lot. And Boulder has a history of actually trying to understand this. In 2019, we worked with a consulting firm out of Amsterdam called Metabolic. And they really did a study into how circular Boulder was, covering 2018 data. And so when I say circular, I'm talking about a term called circular economy. And so that's the idea of a system where the raw materials we try to keep them in the system. But their study looked at these materials and said, okay, how much material flows into Boulder and out of Boulder. So they did this via site visits, interviews, lots of research and analysis, and came up with estimates for the mass of materials as they flow into Boulder and out. But this really doesn't track emissions. Things that are very large in mass may not have large emissions. Things that are very small in mass can have very large emissions. But there were a lot of interesting findings. There were hotspots and areas of opportunity in this report as we start to think about what does circularity mean here in Boulder. And one of the big quotes that come from the report is that the size of embodied emissions is larger than all local sources of emissions put together. That means that even a small change in circularity can have an enormous effect on overall impact. And so that's really a big statement, and it leads us to start thinking about what to do with this type of information. So from that report, some key takeaways is that circularity is really an essential climate strategy. I think our department shifted from thinking about waste management and zero waste to really a systems change approach around consumption. And really, since the report is not an actual inventory of emissions and rather materials, there's a need to better understand the activities, behaviors, and what's being consumed to better understand where to target future solutions. So enter the need to actually produce one of these consumption-based emissions inventories. So just to define what these are greenhouse gas inventories, tracking emissions associated with products and services. So it's the entire, sorry, was there a question? I lost the video room, it's really zoomed in. I'll continue on, but this is tracking the entire life cycle of emissions. So production, transportation, usage, disposal. And again, these emissions, they can occur anywhere in the world, but they have to be the result of a residential activity. And I really like this image. I think this came from Oregon, but it really shows that these two inventories, while they're different, they track a lot of the same things and they provide a lot of differences as well. So just to give you some examples of what might show up in a consumption-based inventory that's not in our sector-based inventory, think about the energy used to heat our homes. We track that in a sector-based inventory, and that's also included in a consumption-based inventory, but not the energy or the emissions associated with creating those homes. The same goes for food, goods, and services. We don't track much of those at all in a sector-based inventory, and those will start to show up. This, you may have seen this article in the New York Times. I think it came out a couple months ago, maybe a little bit more, but it was done by the Cool Climate Network, which is out of UC Berkeley. And it used a consumption-based approach to provide these incredible maps that show the relative nature of consumption in various neighborhoods. And so you could zoom in on all over the country and look at different cities and say, where are emissions per capita higher or lower, and what are the key factors that indicate that. The key takeaways that they talk about in the article is that density is correlated with lower emissions. More dense neighborhoods tend to be more walkable, lower car ownership, and lower per capita emissions. And also in there, that wealth correlates with higher consumption and hence higher emissions per capita. And so we're underway, excuse me, we're underway producing a consumption-based emissions inventory. We're working with a company called Eco Data Lab, and actually they're the same people as the Cool Climate Network, so we're seeing very similar information. And their approach is to take a national consumer expenditure survey, which talks about what people buy, and layer in census data and local data, and have these key characteristics that they can use to model things into consumption categories. So it takes into account household income, the size of the household, the size of the home, meaning number of rooms, are homes owned, how many vehicles does the household have, and educational attainment. And this is a really great approach for us. On our end, it's very feasible. We don't have to provide tons of local data, and we quickly get back really useful information about these consumption categories and subcategories. And I'm going to talk about that information in a second. But it does have some drawbacks, kind of thinking about the future, which is that because it's demographic focused, we can't really change the demographic variables. So new policy, behavior changes, infrastructure, technology, if those happen to change consumption, they may not change those demographic variables. So we'll need new approaches if we are trying to track those changes looking forward. So we have some preliminary results. We don't have a final report, so that everything you see from here on out is preliminary, although it's quite interesting. I have a picture on the next slide, the same picture that's a little bigger of this. I know it's hard to see. But when you look at the total footprint that's covered in this inventory, and again, we have up to 2019 in the preliminary results. When we release the final report, it'll have through 2021. But there are 2 million metric tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent citywide in the consumption basin. Our 2019 community inventory had 1.7 million metric tons. So it's covering a good bit bigger amount of emissions. So we're seeing a lot of new sources, which is, to me, indicates really new and useful information. Again, I want to remind you, there's a lot of overlap this contains a lot of overlap, it has a lot of new stuff, and it doesn't cover everything that our current inventory. So they're both very useful. And we're seeing, excuse me, we're seeing some of the things you'd expect. Transportation and housing remain the biggest categories as they are in our sector-based inventory. So that hasn't changed, but we're starting to see just how big of a factor foods, goods, and services are. If you look on the left, you see gasoline. That's really not surprising that it's a really big, in fact, the biggest single subcategory of emissions. But we start to see some new things: healthcare, eating out, furnishings and appliances. These are things that are not tracked in our current inventory. So again, really great information coming through, and I think we're going to have a lot to think about when we get the final report. We're also going to get some really useful census tract level maps, like this one shown here, and you can see. Hopefully, you can see. The colors change over different tracts, but you see in downtown Boulder, per capita emissions are lower, and the more rural, more suburban areas, the emissions are higher. So that really points to seeing in city center where things are higher density, more walkable neighborhoods, more transportation options, allows people to own fewer vehicles, and smaller homes. All of these things correlate to lower per capita emissions. And on the converse, higher per capita emissions occur in more suburban neighborhoods. So those are larger detached homes, lack of nearby destinations, so not very walkable. People tend to take cars places more, and so have higher transportation emissions. And of course, they own more vehicles per capita or per household. The other thing that's quite notable and also not surprising when you read the article from the New York Times, but each dot here represents a census tract or neighborhood. So you have the average income and the emissions shown for each dot. And you can clearly see there's a strong correlation. As income goes up, so do emissions. And so some takeaways that we think are going to be true when we have that final report. There's a high correlation between income, vehicle ownership, home size. As those things go up, so do emissions. Transportation and buildings, of course, are still these major sources of emissions. And then we're going to get all kinds of new information that's going to be really useful. Foods, goods, services. They're big sources of emissions, and we have a lot more information about what Boulder consumes. As we think about moving forward, and the next steps for this work, we'll be releasing the report when it's done and available, which is hopefully sometime this spring, soon, or early summer. And then we're going to continue to work with EcoData Lab on some additional business as usual analysis. And I think this is a really important point here, because as we think about that, we have a lot of work underway, planning around transportation, electrification, the partnership with Xcel, where there's commitments to having the grid get a lot cleaner. This picture is going to change quite a bit. And so if we think about what we have queued up for the future, we need to think about what is this picture going to look like, and what are we not approaching, or what do we need to start thinking about? Because in the future, categories like food, goods, and services are all going to need to be thought about and approached. So giving more information for our circular economy efforts. That's all I have. I'd be happy to field any questions or discuss this further, or follow up with more information as it comes out.
Thank you, Ben, for your presentation. It was really, really good. We have ever seen so much data at the Environmental Advisory Board. So I think we have about, I want to say 20-30 minutes for discussion. We're gonna be done by 8. So I'll start. If you guys have any questions? Okay with you guys?
I have one to start us off. So one of your slides showed, students make up maybe about 33% of our population. And you've kind of framed this as a very demographic kind of based study. Is there a need to, or would it be beneficial to also look at kind of the students as a demographic and how they play into kind of the emissions and how that changes maybe as a function of kind of the education or the academic calendar year? Is there any information that can be useful there?
So yeah, I think my answer maybe this slide was the one you were referring to. By the pure nature of how this is done, the data that goes into this there's some local data, but that's like vehicle registration data, and not data about the university. And so in terms of feasibility and producing information about emissions, it's not capturing that. I think that that's something that makes this easier for us to get information. As we look forward in the future, we may need to, I guess if the need is to track emissions at some level like that, like how does the seasonal nature of students, we would need to produce local data related to that and work with the consultant to produce something like that. So this really just, I guess, is a way of saying that the Eco Data Lab doesn't really have the ability to go about answering that kind of local nature question.
Thank you.
And it's like annual data too. It's not monthly or something like that, where you would look at a time series. Do you have any questions? I was wondering, I know we haven't really analyzed this because it's preliminary data, but actually if you could just make that slide bigger. The preliminary results. I was wondering,
This one?
yes. Well, I mean, either one. I was more so looking at the graph, but yeah, sure, that one too. Yeah, I was just curious about the housing column, which is the second largest. And I'm wondering what goes into, like, I think I can see which shades of blue are the housing, like from shelter up to other heating fuels. So I'm wondering, what is your definition of shelter in terms of how to measure emissions? Is that like building construction materials itself? And like how you produce the materials for the construction and the construction itself of the shelter? Or is that
Yeah, I think I would have to give a complete answer here, I would have to talk with Eco Data Lab specifically there, but the shelter is the piece that includes, excuse me. The shelter is the piece that is really the construction materials piece, and it may also include, emissions associated with putting those together, cranes, things like that. But the way that they approach that, and maybe an important detail here, is that they distribute the emissions over the lifetime. So this is an annual picture, so that 1.06, they have a methodology around saying, all right, like we spread it out over the life of a building.
Do you happen to know what other lodging is? Is that like a second home kind of situation, or is that like our homeless population who don't live in standardized like permanent homes?
I think I would need to look that up. I might have it. I might be able to
Yeah, I'm just really curious about all of this because it seems relatively like a very new and a really exciting way to look at this data. And so I'm trying to figure out like where the biggest is where we could reduce our.
Also curious if that could be hotels or
Oh, yeah.
those kinds of things.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know that one off the top of my head. And also some of that is just, this is, you know, we don't even have a draft report. Yeah, this is just some
Right.
preliminary things they've shared with us. So we'll have greater explanations of some of these things when the final report is released. But I can try to look that.
Yeah, and then. Yeah, I guess I have a comment more than a question, but I would very much agree. With, I guess, two of the points that you've made throughout the presentation, which was, by the way, very, very good. I really like the work that you're doing, and I think it's really important work for our city. One is that we should really start looking towards circularity to reduce emissions. And in terms of like making sure that we can fully recycle items here and making sure that we're producing fully recyclable items for us to use that. And then and I guess as a spin-off of that, I think places like Nude Foods, which I've started to go to a lot, that has, yeah, I love that place too. Little out of my budget range, unfortunately, but I think that once we start expanding like take back stores and places with reusable items and expanding farmers markets so that there isn't a lot of the transportation emissions. We can really start making a dent in our emissions. The other thing was I know it's how do I say this? Have to channel my I think it was very telling from the data that obviously backs it up that that emissions are higher when places are less dense. And I think that Boulder should continue to go down the route of encouraging density, especially for people who might not be able to afford larger places to live alone, houses instead of apartment buildings. And I think that it clearly ties into our emissions reduction, which is one of the main goals of I think the city in general and the people who live here. I have said that in the most politically correct way. You guys all know what I'm doing.
I have a perhaps related comment and question. So I know that the state was voting on the bill for occupancy reform today, and I don't think that has come out how it turned out, or did it just, I'm not sure. I haven't checked recently.
Senate Bill 213.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it did pass out of the House.
Okay.
With a lot of the amendments put back in.
Mhm.
It will need to go back to the House, obviously, and we'll have an uphill battle to retain some of the amendments that were stripped out when it came out of the Senate committee, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So given that, you know, obviously this folds into, or it could have consequences in, I think, both the housing and transportation sectors if we're changing housing occupancy, changing how people commute in and out of Boulder, et cetera. So my question is, have you seen, since you started kind of tracking these data, Or would you be on the lookout for, significant changes in some of these categories and being able to connect that to certain policy changes, bills, kind of, or even social changes, so that there's kind of an avenue to track, things that have tangibly moved the needle, and if we can capitalize on that and really understand what we've done well.
Yeah, I think that was really one of I think the strength of this particular work is the information we get from it. But one of the limitations is that if we want to track how policy changes or behavior changes or infrastructure changes, how those impact these numbers, we're going to have to do additional and a different type of analysis in this area. This really is a study based on demographic information. So unless those policies change things, like, which they could theoretically change home sizes or vehicle ownership, we won't see it in this type of work moving forward. So it may be that if we want to track something like that, we'll just need to do additional work and I think how these things are done with another methodology is really through just surveying gathering local data to support that sort of analysis. I can see Yael has her hand up. Maybe she wants to add some context here.
Yeah, no, that was great. Hi, everyone. I'm Yael Gishan. I'm a principal project manager in climate initiatives, and I've been working with Ben a little bit on this work. And I think he answered that right on, that it's based on the demographic data, and as he mentioned, like the data that we'll get is 2021. So there's a bit of a lag too in the data. But I think one of the neat things that we're going to be exploring is if we want to continue on with this particular consultant and this model, is they have the ability, just based on research and analysis and data that they have, is to look at future policies. And so like if we pull different levers with different policies, what we can model what we think the impact will be. So I think while it might not be actual data, I think it might be interesting from a local government or even a state government perspective to start to say, like, if we can make these kinds of changes, here's what we think the impact would be based on those changes. And that's something we can explore looking at in the future.
I have a few questions. I would like to understand where this data fits, like, in the bigger picture in terms of your roles, I guess. Like, you guys are collecting this data right now, and that's a role of your project or department. And is that the extent of it? Like, how was this born? Like, let's say it was like, we want to collect this consumption-based data. I know you've been doing that for a few years. Is that what the result of that is? Like, are you in a collecting data stage right now? Or are you like actually like looking at this data and trying to like work with other departments to like implement policies? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the first time we've actually done this kind of data analysis. Like, this is the first time we've looked at consumption-based emissions inventory from a data gathering perspective. So right now, I would say we are in the data collection phase, and I think that sort of we need to decide what the next steps are as far as, it's a big awareness raising tool, and there's a lot of education, I think, that can be generated from just having the data. Gives you the awareness, so people's choices and decisions, hopefully that's a big piece of it, I think. And then starting to kind of socialize it around the city organization, and then with, like, I was saying, looking at like what the impacts of different policies might be that we might want to look at longer term. And as Ben mentioned, I think the business as usual case is going to be interesting, because right now the data that we're gathering doesn't tell us, like, in 2030 our emissions are going to be a lot lower from just our grid and our electricity. So that's going to actually change the balance of things quite a bit. So you're going to have a smaller section in one area, but it's going to make other choices that we're making on our consumption look bigger. So I think there's a lot. It's pretty preliminary at this phase, but I don't know if Ben or you or Jonathan want to add anything in.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, from my perspective, that was a great answer. So I have nothing to add.
I just want to make sure I pick up on the other piece of your question in terms of how we as a department are thinking about utilizing this data. And Yael was spot on. You know, we as a department have organized a lot of our interventions and strategies based on our sector based emissions inventory. So we say, where are our biggest levers that we can pull to reduce emissions? Well, a number of things have been happening at once. Number one, we realized that we don't control all of the factors. So like the grid intensity, or excuse me, the carbon intensity of our grid power, we just tend to drive programs to use less. Right. So the problem with that is that it sends you down pathways that don't really have the impact that you're seeking. I'll give you an example. For many years, a lot of our work, as you look at this graph, we measure not because buildings emit carbon, they use energy. And you then look at the carbon intensity of that energy, and that's the proxy in terms of how buildings, the miles per gallon that building is getting. So a lot of our work has been, how do you reduce the consumption of the electricity at that site? What that doesn't take into account is the regionality. So let's just say a big entity like Ball Aerospace in one of their big, large transmission customer, level company, or a secondary general customer, picks up and moves to a different community and to a less efficient building. The overall gross emissions end up going up. We as one community, because we do this geographic boundary and we say our emissions are measured within this space, we can claim victory because our emissions go down, but that's not what we're after. So it gives us a more holistic look at what we're doing. So to answer your question around what we do with this data, it allows us to start talking to other departments, I think, as you accurately point out. So thinking about the conversation we were having about embodied energy in our buildings, that was a great question in terms of what does that look like? That's not something that we calculated previously. That allows us to talk with our planning department and build in more in terms of code and our deconstruction requirements. So we can start to see the value in terms of emissions in areas that we've not looked previously. So we as a department, we gather the information and we work across the board in terms of setting policy that we're responsible for, encouraging policy that really frames up, climate equity and resilience across our organization. And then we work at a higher scale. We do policy work at the regional level and at the state level, and in some cases, the federal level. So we use this information to really drive that policy reform that needs to be done at that scale that it needs to be done, whether it's regional or statewide. So we do have a really important role in that. And this data is really going to be helpful in shaping that narrative as we move forward. The other thing while I'm talking, I just really appreciated the comment about the circularity. And we have some experts on our staff that you probably met. Jamie Harkins, who heads up our circular economy team, is a real expert in circularity. And thinking about applying that circular lens, not just to waste and materials, but to everything that we do. How do we think about it from food systems and transportation systems? And that's the work that we did with Metabolic that was so powerful as they created that circular Boulder report for us. And now we can start bringing that into a lot of the work we do in terms of programming and policy. So I hope that answered your question. That it's very, very comprehensive, but we are still in the data gathering phase. And then we need to figure out what do we do with that information, which is why you heard Ben say that we're gathering it both ways. We're continuing to do our sector-specific emission inventory, but we're also looking at this comprehensive view so we can start to see the differences and then figure out how that really informs the department as a city.
How do you collect the data then? Because again, at some point, like, is it like county-based, state-based? Like, how is the data collection working here?
Well, you hire a really smart person like Ben.
How do you, I mean, I'm not,
All that.
I don't know, this is not a critique at all. I'm just curious, like, how do you even measure this? Like, like, how do you, like, eating out? Do you see like sales tax receipts? Like, how do you?
Yeah,
how do
I
you
talked
see
about
it?
like really briefly. Let's see. Yeah, so the key here is this first bullet point. So this consumer expenditure survey is a national survey that's done. And I don't know how many participants it has, but people sign up for it and they share what they buy. And so you get information about a lot of households in the US about what they're buying. And attached to that is demographic information associated with the people in the survey. And so you can use that to be representative of Boulder. And of course, that's not all that Eco Data Lab does, but that's kind of at the core of it, is actual purchasing data from a lot of people in the US. I know it's thousands of people. And so you just tie their income and how big their home is, and how many people are in their home, and you can get at that information that way. Eco Data Lab also does some other stuff with local data to try to adjust to make things more regionally accurate, as opposed to just taking people from all over the US, because people are different all over the place. Does that answer your question, or at least well enough?
Yeah. So that's a good answer. That makes sense. So then, so this data is public, or you bought it or somehow, and then you just extract the city of Boulder or Boulder County data from that, like a census on consumption, basically.
Yeah, that's Eco Data Lab does that piece, right? So
Okay.
but that is publicly, I believe it's publicly available data. They don't have to buy it. But they use that data. They use census available data, and then where appropriate, we help them get local data. So like local vehicle registration information.
And is a 2019 report online? I did a Google search just now, but I couldn't find it. So
Yeah.
it's a
I didn't quite hear your question.
Is the 2019 report online?
No. If you want to see one that has been released, you can look at King County in which is Seattle, Washington. You can see what one of these looks like. But we don't. Ours has not been released yet. It's not online.
Just clarify when we say the 2019 report, let's make sure we're clear about it.
I figured like Eco Data Lab, like all these figures must come from some report, right?
Okay, got it. I'll make sure, yeah.
Or it's just a presentation that they submitted to you guys, like.
Or that would be the metabolic one?
No, this is the information they've shared with me.
Okay, so they send you these slides, and that's all we have.
That's preliminary.
Yeah, that's all we have. Yeah.
There's some emissions data on the data dashboard online, but that is probably not the embodied data. Correct?
That's our sector-based inventory.
Yes.
And we also have a city operations inventory that I didn't discuss.
Are other cities looking at this? Obviously you mentioned King County, but is there a general move towards at least looking at this in parallel with the sector-based inventory? And
I can speak anecdotally. I know when I've been part of, I'm part of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, like Scope 3 framework, where lots of cities throughout the world are looking at conducting their first, or they've already done a consumption-based inventory. I know that San Francisco's done one, obviously Seattle is part of King County. I believe New York has done one. Really, I'm saying this anecdotally, but I think not everyone, but most major cities are trending towards capturing consumption-based emissions inventories.
So also have a question about, so is this graph from 2018 data?
This would be 2019.
2019 data, okay, so
And
then,
and just, I think everybody knows this, but this is preliminary data, so,
right,
you know, of course, even this could change, although I wouldn't imagine it changing in a significant.
so well, my question was basically, is this pre-pandemic? Especially since the healthcare is so high. And we've kind of almost morphed into a hybrid healthcare system now, where like several, you could have doctor visits now routinely online. So I'm wondering, do we by any chance have any post-pandemic or mid-pandemic data to see if that has changed significantly?
I don't, certainly not on the healthcare front. I think that would be a really interesting question, to hear that, not just with healthcare, but across the board, you know, how does the pandemic show up in these
Right.
reports? You know, I know we can see it in our community inventory, most notably in the transportation drop that we saw in 2020.
Yeah, I just think that there are some there are some habits that we have retained from the pandemic. So like I still have a couple doctors that I see virtually, just because it has worked. So I'm probably using less emission, or I'm probably creating less emissions with my healthcare than I was pre-pandemic level, and I'll continue to do that.
That would show up in the technically up in the transportation.
Yeah.
And not the healthcare category, but I'm sure that the point remains.
Okay.
Behavior
So-
changes in the way people use healthcare. You know, may remain. It'd be interesting to see if they can capture any of that in this report.
Actually, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's an interesting question that I have from what you just said. So how do you separate, because this is a kind of life cycle analysis approach to carbon accounting, GHG accounting. So how would you separate transportation that's specifically for healthcare from transportation that's to and from job or for pleasure? Is that included in the healthcare? Is it double counted? Or like, how do you avoid double counting?
Yeah. So again, you tie that back to the consumer expenditure survey. So in there, you would have a household purchasing, say, gasoline show up in the survey. And so that would show up in this transportation gas category. And that would show up as like a trip, hypothetically, to hospital would be covered in this gas category here. Whereas there would be transportation emissions embodied into this healthcare category associated with bringing medical supplies to BCH.
Right.
Those would show up in the healthcare. Yeah.
And then,
No, that's it.
so basically, once you get the 2021 report from Eco Data Labs, you know, you're not gonna do any more data analyzing, right? You're just gonna take the report at face value and then just pass the data along to other departments for any policy, for any projects or policy drafting, or right, like you're just not. I mean, are you gonna do like a even deeper dive, or it's just like, you know, you're hiring this consulting firm for the data, the reports, and then, you know, once you receive it, you're not gonna do any further analysis, or are you?
Yeah. I let me take a stab at this, and Jonathan, I'll feel free to jump in here. But I think this is really we think of this as informative. You know, we don't have community level data that talks about goods, services, healthcare, food. And so we'll take this information and we'll try to incorporate that into how we think about our circular economy approaches and those economic systems that can ideally be made more circular. So I think it informs decisions we will make as a department about what to try and tackle. And I think there will be further research done when we need better information. For example, we were just talking about healthcare. That's a really big bar that we don't know a lot about what that's made up of. And I don't know if that's something that's it's even possible for us to try to address as a department. But I think so, like, if we need more information on something, then that's when we would do a deeper dive, and we'd need to produce another study, potentially with this or a different consultant. So that's my understanding of this is really informative and hopefully will inform future approaches, and of course deeper dives where necessary. I don't know, John, Danielle, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but.
I don't need to add a lot. I want to make sure that you all understand. I think from our perspective, this is really informative in terms of expanding the way we think about our impact. So traditionally, as we've talked about a lot tonight, we focus a lot of our strategies on the big sectors, right? How do we decarbonize our energy system? That's electricity, natural gas, and transportation. How do we think about our buildings and the way they use energy? How do we think about our nature-based climate solutions? How do we think about our waste? And whether or not the numbers are completely accurate, the reality is you can see these big bands starting to take shape. And so that allows us to say, well, you know what, as Yael pointed out earlier, we're seeing even spending a lot of our time on policy and regulation to drive our utilities to decarbonize our energy supply. So now this gives us really good information to say where are the next biggest sectors for intervention, whether those be programmatic, incentivizing behavior change for our residents and businesses, whether it be regulatory in nature. How do we fit those into our existing regulatory structure? Do we need to make changes to our building codes? How do we think about changing the behaviors around consumption? You look at those big bands in transportation, there is a huge amount there in terms of backstopping our discussion around the importance of electrifying our fleets and electrifying the vehicles that people are still going to continue to use, tying that to the conversation we just had about e-bikes. So it gives us this data-driven exploration that's more than anecdotal. And whether or not these numbers are going to be completely accurate, I think it really helps us drive in the right direction. No pun intended, but move in the right direction.
So given, like you're saying, these big bands and categories that we're all talking about, and I know that obviously you didn't collect these data, but is there a space for including data? We bring in the kind of circular economy, what is being reused, recycled, kind of, you know, we have all these negative bars, if you will, if there's some a space to put in a positive, putting things back into the system. Is there a way to track that, do you think, given this framework?
Is there, sorry, maybe repeat it. So is there a way to track?
I guess folding into like obviously like the full cycle, life cycle of the products, you know, if their life cycle is being extended through recycling, reuse, or something like that, is there kind of like a positive category that we can incorporate into the data?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some sense, you don't have to track emissions to know that you're impacting a system. So for example, in the eating out category, you can't, from this analysis, you can't know exactly what are the emissions associated with all of the takeout containers. But our circular economy team has a focus on reusable containers and supporting innovation and companies around those. I think their names are like Deliver Zero and RCup. And so we can track information about the use of those types of things, just using that as an example, to know that we're impacting these. I think the more we work at understanding what's inside of these bars and how to really approach those things, I think we'll want to think about ways to track the behavior or the usage associated with pilot programs, bigger things, or as we shift towards policy. You know, there are other ways to track this information, and a full-scale consumption-based inventory can be done again in the future to support that from an emissions standpoint as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, so want to keep us on track with the agenda. So thank you, Ben, for this presentation. It's really nice to see we have all of this data. I didn't know. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I look forward to sharing it out when it's all done. And thank you all for having me. Hope you all have a good night.
Thank you so much. Great
Thank you.
presentation.
Okay. So let's move on to the next item in the agenda. Thank you. I guess we don't have any old business nor updates. So the next item will be the council calendar preview.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't know that we'll need 15 minutes, but maybe we will. We'll see where this conversation goes. At your last month's meeting, we had a conversation among the board members and myself around trying to find some methodology to make sure that the board is up to date on the things that council will be seeing. So there's a regular cadence of information that goes to council with the intention of finding ways to get in early in terms of the board providing comments, feedback, and input to council, and you're an advisory board to that council. So it made sense to figure out what are the things that are actually in flight, basically going to council. And I don't know that this is necessarily the best, but I wanted to just talk a little bit with you all about the way to get that information to you and the best format. So what you saw to your packet this time is the council agenda committee summary. So let me just tell you what that is. Every Monday, there are 3 members of city council that review their meeting agendas. So that's both their study sessions and their business meetings. And so they meet on a weekly basis. The mayor is always present, and then the 2 other council members rotate through. So the purpose of that is to go through the scheduling of various items that are coming to the council, but also to talk about kind of the meeting flow and cadence. They don't make any real substantive conversation or decisions at those meetings. It's really kind of agenda and meeting management. The reason I bring that up is that it's a public meeting, and the document that you see attached to your packet is essentially the notes and the summary of each of those weekly meetings. Why I felt like this was at least an option for you to consider is it starts to give you a sense of the things that are going to council, the time that is allotted to each of those items. The one thing that I would just note that you probably picked up on is that it doesn't really give you this kind of far ahead look in terms of like the 3 to 6 month view that gives us adequate time to say, hey, 6 months out, council is going to be talking about ADUs, for example. So let's make sure to back up the time for the staff team to build in a presentation to the board. That way you have plenty of time to see the item, provide input, that input actually goes to the summary of recommendations to council, or however you want to get your feedback to council. So I just want to acknowledge that even if you look at the extended meeting calendar, which is on the back of the packet, it's still looking at June 1st. But what you can do is if you look in that middle section, this additional council anticipated items in Q2, That's one place that the council has started to look at the things that we know are likely going to be coming, but they haven't really put those in a date yet. So I would say that probably the most valuable section as we get into a regular cadence is going to be this little box in here, because those are the topics that staff has identified and we're still working on getting those scheduled. So the question, I guess, that I pose to the three of you tonight is something like this a bit of what you are looking for? Again, this was, I think, my idea, so I don't want to assume anything, that we do something on a regular cadence with you all, whether it's just an attachment to your packet, whether it's an opportunity to build in a moment in your agendas, maybe in items from staff or from the board to say, notice that there's going to be a check-in on occupancy and zoning and affordable housing on June 15th or in June. That's something that we'd like to do. The thing that you will need to be really thoughtful about, though, is if you are making a decision as a body, you'll need to do that as a body. So you'll need to say, for example, if one of you says, I'd really like to see a presentation or provide input on subject X, you all need to discuss whether or not you want to do that as a body. That direction can then go to staff, and then we can get with the right staff team that's in charge of that item.
I think this is definitely what really we were looking for. The only thing is, like I said, the timeline. So our next meeting, for example, is June 7th. So that's gonna prevent us from avoiding anything else, but these two are they gonna talk, is this tentative or is this gonna happen on June 22nd, like the building energy codes, occupancy and zoning, June 15th? Like, is that when they're gonna be talking about it? Because, we meet on June 7th, then we could prepare something on energy codes. We will have to, I guess, make decisions as a body on June 7th to provide feedback for June 22nd. Is that?
Well, what I can tell you is when it says tentatively, that's because the meeting management process really forces, I think, council, CAC, and staff to say, our target date is June 22nd. I can speak specifically to the building codes because we're heavily involved in that one. That's not going to happen on the 22nd. It's going to get pushed out a little bit. Not because we're not ready to go, but because there are a lot of items that are coming before council. They just don't have the time to squish everything into their very packed agendas. So we try to get it into this cadence for council to consider, and then they fill in, and then the CAC meetings go something like this. We have a little bit of time. We need to move this up. So we need to bump something, and then to balance out that meeting, then the staff team says, well, I can go a little bit later in order for that to move forward. So council really manages the flow of those meetings. Though I don't think it necessarily prevents you from starting to look at giving feedback to us to say, hey, we would really like to have input on building codes. And if you as a board believe that that's the case, then we can say, okay, let's get with the staff team. And then as we start to solidify the date, then we know we need to back that up.
I think that will be good, like if we can, before they meet, maybe like even on June 7th for us, we can, add that to the agenda so we can start discussing it. So I think that would be great.
And I think just sticking with the first question that you asked, I think I am also very in favor of continuing with this format. And I'm not sure what you think of having this kind of thing at the back of our packets, but I really like that. And then to continue, I think we should also have a discussion on our charter as our charter as a committee in order to figure out if we want to move to more annual meetings than we have currently. And then we have currently agreed to 12 meetings per year, but maybe we want to increase that if we have more stuff to talk about, or if things are coming up in a faster pace. City Council has a lot of environmental topics on their agenda in succession.
I think that's something that maybe we will add to our agenda, as an agenda item next meeting. To discuss that on whether a fixed number or on a per item or per need basis. I don't know how that works.
I would offer the cadence of your meetings. It's not something that's governed by the charter.
Oh, it's not.
So if you want to change the purview of the board in terms of things that you oversee, things that should come to you, it's more that kind of qualitative narrative that I would say that you should look at. But you're not limited to certain numbers. Your charter doesn't say you have to have certain number of meetings, or it doesn't prohibit you from doing more. That's something that the board.
So then, yeah, so if or I would offer the board to consider every meeting that we have, we would have kind of this kind of summary of council potential agenda topics that they're going to discuss, and then based on the number of things that are related to environmental issues that we want to discuss, we would vote every meeting to add an additional meeting that month or not, based on how many long this discussion items would take for us to get through.
I consider working out on a per need basis, if we need to meet in 2 weeks, even if it's just for 50 minutes, just to agree as a body on, some proposal or whatever, we could do that. I mean, I don't think it'll be even just over Zoom, we don't have to be in person just as a.
Right, yeah.
But I guess as a little experiment, we can try to see if the current cadence we have right now will be enough to provide feedback for, if we can play catch up with council and be like, okay, for example, and we know for sure after June 22nd, they'll be discussing energy code. So it's the monthly cadence we have now enough time to provide feedback on that and, get.
I would also suggest the Alpine Balsam update facilities master plan. Facilities plans usually can deal a lot with emissions, especially it's the first item on 5. May 25th, which would we would need an additional meeting this month in order to make that work, if that is definitely going to be scheduled before by May 25th.
I would, sorry.
But
Go ahead. Okay, thanks.
I know also you have a comment.
Yeah, I'll let Jonathan go, and then I have a couple.
Yeah, so just 2 comments. One, particularly on Alpine Balsam, I would suggest that that's probably not something that you need to weigh on at this moment. And the reason being is this particular topic is not on the overall project of Alpine Balsam and updating. It's really thinking about looking at more of the budgetary requirements for what is needed to complete that project. And that's part of the facilities master plan. So it's really looking at how do we think about our portfolio buildings, because there was a plan. I mean, we've gone to council quite a few times to talk about the Alpine Balsam project. I think there are absolutely dimensions of that project that we need to be talking to you all about as we get into kind of the site design. There's so much in motion right now as we think about the BHP portion of the site and the West City campus portion, and then thinking about the overall kind of function and use of that site. Those are absolutely things. That one in particular, I wouldn't stress and rush to try to add a meeting because I don't think that it's probably
not
something
a
that.
finalizing meeting.
Yes.
It's still in the works.
Right.
Okay.
And then my second comment, and I'm sorry, I'm talking so much. I just want to make sure that you all, I can't commit our other departments and their timelines. What I can commit to is if you start to say, we'd really like to have some input into these topics, I can go to those departments and make sure that there's been that request made. And then I can hear back from them on, well, we have to have a memo here, or it doesn't fit there. I don't think that's going to be the case, but I just want to make sure that I'm setting realistic expectations that every item that you want to see, we may not get all of them into the queue, but I think we're going to get into hearing from you all, making sure you're aware of what council is going to be talking about, and then prioritizing the items that you think are most valuable to you. Okay, so that was a long explanation.
Yeah, so, well, number one, I also agree. I like this format of having this attached to the end of the packet, so we have a chance to individually look at it and then discuss this group, and I like your idea of we have things we want to prepare, establish meeting kind of in the interim. And you kind of answered my other kind of fundamental question, which is the idea that we as a group say, hey, we want to prioritize this item that city council is going to be talking about in a month and a half. You know, we let you know such that, are we getting information from staff such that we as a body are preparing some sort of presentation? Or are we getting information from staff where we provide feedback and they are taking that information to present to city council kind of on our behalf? And again, that, like you mentioned, this ties in a lot of staff, you know, communication and time and scheduling. So obviously that plays a role in how flexible we can be with kind of throwing in additional meetings, but.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question. If you remember what kind of kicked this off at our last discussion was how do we make sure that the board's voice is being heard to the body that you have been appointed to advise, meaning city council. One of the things that we wrestle with is there are many, many boards that are kind of off on the periphery of kind of this major track for kind of big topics. They typically follow this kind of quasi judicial path to planning board or tab because they have kind of those powers, and the council is in a habit of seeking or expecting input from those boards. So we're trying to do is kind of pull you back in a bit and make sure that the things that the board believes you should be weighing in on are on the stop, so to speak, for the staff team bringing forward. Now, again, why I say I can't commit, sometimes that, you know, for a staff group to go to say like 8 to 10 boards, that's a big lift. But the intention is for the things that you want to prioritize, they would come like we did last month, and you weren't here previous to that, but the idea would staff would present and say, I have a couple of questions for you. Here's what we're taking to council. Get your feedback on, do you agree with the staff recommendation? Are there modifications, edits? And the staff will then represent your advice to council, both in the packet and potentially verbally. You also have the opportunity to show up and represent either the board or as an individual on that item. I mean, you have that purview as well. So let's just say that you don't feel that your voice was adequately represented in the staff memo. You could show up and say, you know what, we talked about this as a board and we believe X, Y, and Z, and council should really think about X, Y, and Z. So there are a number of ways to do that. But I think staff, I would posit that staff really want to make sure that they're representing the board's feedback. But we have a lot of boards, whatever, 22, 24 different boards and commissions. So that's why I say I want to make sure that I would suggest to not look at this list and say we want to input on every one of these things, because A, your meetings are going to get full really fast. And I think it dilutes the impact that you can have.
Well, as an experiment, could we just try getting started with the building energy codes?
Yeah, I would second that. Yeah.
Something you said resonated with me, but it's like when stuff comes to us, it's usually very early in the draft process. So recommendations to council haven't been decided yet. So you get some of our feedback, but there's no, like what you said, is like, is the board against or pro that specific recommendation to council? That part has been asked to us, and I don't know if it's in that moving forward, we will try to do, because it's like, staff could be like, this is what we're gonna recommend to council. I think as part of the memo, it's like the board agrees, or the board agrees with these conditions, or the board disagrees, because that has never happened. I mean, if we could do that, that would be great.
I agree.
Okay, guys, I wanna get out of here by 8.
So is this an official ask to have some sort of information in the next meeting on the building energy code?
It would not be in your next meeting.
Okay,
No, we are not ready to start soliciting feedback from boards yet.
okay, cool.
No, and I will say that was an easy one because we intended to come.
Can I just ask a question? Sorry. Do you want to allocate time to review the CAC summary and discuss it during the meeting? And how much time do you think you need?
I think. Really, the same amount of time, like
15 minutes or so?
maybe 20.
Okay.
And I think that's what we did today, so that'll be. Good.
And the other question I had, would it be helpful for Jonathan to provide information on kind of the process of types of council meetings? These two items that you mentioned, the Alpine Balsam and the building energy codes are both study sessions. And I bring that up because it likely will not be the last opportunity for the board to provide feedback. And I don't know if that would be helpful to get a little overview of the different types of council meetings.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point you bring up. The fact that we would start having access to figure out what is on the study session schedule means that we would have access, that we would know what council would be talking about in larger context in city council meetings. So even these dates are even farther out than we think they are. So that would give us even more time to get back to staff about, we would like to hear about this particular thing that's on a study session, whenever, it comes to council for a city council meeting. So I think that's even a bigger plus of this
Yeah, maybe if it's not too much work, Jonathan, provide some sort of summary, like, hey, this council, or even your department, we talked about. Like the major items like related to climate, like the council talk about this, I know that. The memo about leaf blowers was presented to council and the main recommendation was a based on approach or something like that, right? So maybe like. 15-minute update or 5-10 minutes, I don't know, like just overview of anything related to keep us in the loop because sometimes like we don't keep those things. We focus a lot.
city council meetings do get pretty long.
They're pretty long. So
I think that's one major part of that.
if that would have been too much to ask, then what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think it is. What I would request is to not do that in writing, if that's okay. What I would like to avoid is doing like a memo.
Oh, yeah, just we can just, yeah.
So if I have,
Just a
if we just maybe want to kind of pin this in like a 15-minute portion of like staff update, we can talk about. Since your last meeting, here are some items that went to council. We don't have that many items as a department that are flowing to council. I can tell you what we have on the calendar for this year. But it sounds like this idea of kind of closing the loop, so to speak, say, here are some items that they discuss and whether you follow not, here are the decisions that they made.
Yeah, I wouldn't want you to write a memo, make a PowerPoint, just like a casual.
Okay, yes, perfect.
I wouldn't.
I would also, yes. I have a comment about something that is not related to this topic, so whenever I might be able to share.
It's related to a meeting or do you want to adjourn and then?
Oh, no, I think we should discuss it while we're in the meeting, in the public meeting.
I think. We're out of time. Are you guys okay with saying, will it take more than 5-10 minutes?
No.
Okay, then
No more than that.
I just move it to like updates, old business. And go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I would like to present to city council a recommendation that they call upon President Biden / Congress to protect the ICWA, which is the Indigenous Child Welfare Act. And I think this is specifically related to the work that EAB does, because it is related to a larger movement of land back in the native in the Indigenous space, which has been shown to reduce emissions, to increase welfare of ecosystems. A lot of Indigenous thought a lot of indigenous wisdom is based on land management. Specifically the ICWA is part of a larger, or the ICWA is right now before the Supreme Court, which is the ICWA is a law that prevents non-native parents from adopting native children, which has traditionally been a part of erasing indigenous culture, part of assimilating indigenous people into white society, and erasing their culture and history. And so a lot of this is related to being able to preserve that indigenous land management and cultural education that is really helpful for our planet and also for human rights. So I'm wondering if I could bring a potential written statement to the board for approval or disapproval, and represent the board at a city council public hearing. Public comment, sorry.
I will say it's something we can add to the agenda item for next meeting, discuss it with the president.
It depends on when the Supreme Court will come out with their decision, which is.
I was gonna say, yeah, does the timing work with the next monthly meeting, or are you looking to
I was
have an additional meeting to give us like a written statement?
Yeah, so I was hoping to just have a maybe 15-minute public meeting. It could be on over Zoom. But I would send out a written statement for the board to amend or approve or deny before that time. And I can send it out via email, as long as nobody responds back with like a vote, because that would institute a public.
Would you guys need to be present for any additional meetings?
Yeah, and I just want to be careful when you talk about additional meetings, there's a lot of back end stuff. It has to be publicly noticed.
Right.
We have to back that up. It needs to be posted in the paper. We need to make sure that the public is aware of it. It has to go on the city calendars.
That's also
As a
something
public
for
meeting.
us to, in general, to know.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry that wasn't made. I should have made that a little bit more clear. The alternative is you, and I know that you've done this previously, if it's time sensitive, you can go before council and speak on your, you can represent that you are an EAB board member, but you are speaking on your own behalf. I know that's not what you were asking of the board, but I know that there are three of you. You don't have two members here
Right.
tonight. It feels like it's something that your board should discuss. If you want to take an official position as the environmental advisory board. So.
Right. I was not asking for a decision tonight, because I don't have that written up draft for everybody, and B, there are two members that are missing right now, but
Do you feel comfortable presenting as yourself? As you, I mean, you can say.
yeah. Is that okay with the board, or do you potentially want the entire board to be behind something like that?
I think I like the idea of the board presenting things or presenting, positions in general, given the time constraints. Maybe this isn't the right
Yeah.
one.
Okay.
But I like that idea in general, the ability to, even if something's not explicitly on the city council calendar, if there's something that we as a board want to bring to the public comment. That's a great.
Okay. And then in the future, if we wanted to add additional meetings, how would that work with staff being able to make it public with enough time? How much time would we need to give you?
Let us go back and do a little research and make sure that we're giving you good information, because I don't want to say something tonight and then come back and say, well, we checked with the CAO, the city attorney's office, or the CMO. And we hadn't considered X, Y, or Z. So if you give us, and maybe we can discuss that at our next meeting to say, what would it look like to add some of these additional meetings on kind of an ad hoc or as needed basis?
Is there an option to say, email Heather 2 weeks before a meeting and say, hey, there's a position that I would like to present to the board. I would like to prepare a written statement to present to the board for discussion and amendment at our next meeting, which is already scheduled, already public. Is that an avenue to do that?
What I would recommend is you go through your board chair.
Okay.
Because there is an agenda setting meeting that occurs. And so you all can talk, yeah, but again, not making decisions. I think you can bring forward things that you want to make sure that are on the agenda.
Okay, guys, since we're a little bit past 8, the next meeting is scheduled for June 7. And I think that's it for today. So I motion to adjourn the meeting. 22nd.
I third.
All right, then we're done. Thank you. Everyone.
Thank you.
Second on the third.